My name is Kingsley Whitaker. I'm 31 years old, and 2 weeks ago I sat in my parents' living room in Wichita, Kansas, watching my entire family raise their glasses to the same lie. My older brother Gunnar stood in the center of the room, champagne in hand, and announced with the biggest grin, "I will be the sole owner of the trust fund Grandpa set up." He turned to me and added, "Don't be sad, little sister." My parents nodded like they'd rehearsed it, their faces glowing with pride. The room exploded in applause, people already congratulating the new millionaire. I just smiled, reached into my bag, and placed a thick manila envelope right in front of him. The clapping stopped like someone hit mute. Gunnar tore it open, his face went white. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. He looked up at me and screamed the one question I'd waited 5 years to hear. "How do you have that?" If you've ever been counted out by the people who were supposed to love you most, smash that subscribe button and keep watching. You're about to see what happens when the quiet one finally speaks. I knew before I even started kindergarten that in the Whitaker house, there were only two kinds of kids: the one who could do no wrong, and the one who could never do anything right. Growing up in Wichita, Kansas, my older brother Gunnar Whitaker, who's 34 now, was the son everything revolved around. When he turned 16, Dad handed him the keys to a brand new Ford F-150, while I got told the bus pass was fine. Gunnar wanted to play high school football, so Mom and Dad paid for private coaches and the best gear money could buy. When it came time for college, they wrote the full ride check to the University of Kansas without blinking. I, on the other hand, worked double shifts at the local diner starting junior year, stacked every scholarship I could find, and still graduated with loans because girls don't need the same opportunities, they get married anyway. My younger brother, Dash Whitaker, is 23 today, so back then, he was still little enough that the favoritism hadn't fully hit him yet. He got hand-me-down cleats instead of new ones, but at least he wasn't invisible like me. I spent most of my childhood trying to disappear into the wallpaper so nobody would notice I existed and find another reason to remind me I was the spare. The only person who ever treated me like I mattered was Grandpa Clyde. Every other weekend he'd drive his old Chevy pickup to our house, honk twice, and I'd run out with my little overnight bag. We'd head 45 minutes outside Wichita to the same small farm he'd owned since the 70s, where the air smelled like cut hay, and there were no lectures about how Gunnar was the future of the family. He taught me how to check oil, how to balance a checkbook, how to spot when someone was trying to take advantage of you. He never once compared me to Gunnar. To him, I was just Kingsley, his granddaughter who could fix a fence post faster than most grown men he knew. He'd sit on the porch swing in the evenings, hand me a root beer, and say the same thing every time: money doesn't make the person, but it sure shows who they really are when they get it. I figured he was just giving old man wisdom. I never imagined he was preparing me. I always assumed that when the time came, he'd split whatever he had 3 equal ways, because that's the kind of man he was, fair to the bone. Gunnar could do whatever he wanted with his share. Dash would finally get a real shot, and I'd be able to pay off the rest of my loans and breathe for the first time in my life. That belief was the one warm thing I carried through every cold shoulder at home. Looking back, I can see the exact moment the cracks started showing. Gunnar graduated college, moved back to Wichita, and suddenly he was at Grandpa's side, constantly driving him to doctor appointments, handling paperwork, telling everyone he was taking care of things so the old man doesn't have to worry. Dad bragged about it nonstop. Mom teared up, talking about what a good grandson he was. I was working 80-hour weeks in Denver by then, building a career I paid for myself, so I swallowed the guilt and told myself it made sense that Gunnar was the one there. I had no idea he was already laying the groundwork for the biggest lie our family would ever believe, or that Grandpa had seen it coming long before any of us did. 5 years ago, my phone rang at 2 in the morning, jolting me awake in my tiny Denver apartment. It was my mother, Vivian Whitaker, her voice shaking as she said Grandpa Clyde had a stroke and wasn't expected to make it through the night. I booked the first flight to Wichita, my hands trembling so badly I could barely type the payment details. The entire 3-hour trip, I stared out the plane window praying I'd get there in time to say goodbye. When I landed, my father, Malcolm Whitaker, was waiting at the airport, his face grim. He drove me straight to the hospital, but the second we walked into the ICU, I knew something was off. Gunnar was already there, standing by Grandpa Clyde's bed, talking loudly about how he'd been by his side all week. Mom hovered nearby, nodding at every word he said. They barely acknowledged me, and when I tried to approach the bed, Gunnar snapped that I was stressing everyone out and needed to wait my turn. I stood frozen, watching the nurses adjust tubes and monitors, feeling like an intruder in my own grandfather's final moments. Finally, after what felt like hours, a nurse took pity and let me have 20 minutes alone with him. Grandpa Clyde was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, but when I took his hand, his fingers twitched. He turned his head slightly, eyes locking onto mine with a clarity that made my chest tighten. Without a word, he reached under the blanket, pulled out a small USB drive, and pressed it into my palm. His voice was so faint I had to lean in to hear, "Only you. He'll take it all. Protect your brother." I tried to ask what he meant, but he just squeezed my hand and closed his eyes. The monitors flatlined 10 minutes later. I was still clutching the USB when Mom and Gunnar came back, and both of them crying so loudly it felt staged. Gunnar grabbed the doctor, demanding to know why more wasn't done, while Mom wailed about losing the best man she ever knew. I wanted to scream that they hadn't even let me stay with him, but I swallowed it down and slipped the USB into my pocket. When I asked if I could help with the funeral, Mom waved me off, saying Gunnar was handling everything because he was closest to Dad. I flew back to Denver the next day alone with nothing but that USB and a knot in my stomach. The funeral was a week later, and it was like watching a performance. Gunnar stood at the front of the church delivering a speech about how much Grandpa Clyde trusted him, how they'd spent countless hours talking about the family's future. He looked every mourner in the eye and said, "Grandpa told me personally he wanted me to take care of everything he left behind." The room murmured in approval, and Dad clapped him on the back like he'd just won an award. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering to the woman next to her that her son was so responsible. I sat in the back row staring at the USB in my purse, wondering what Grandpa Clyde meant by, "He'll take it all." After the service, people kept coming up to Gunnar, shaking his hand, offering condolences like he was the only one who'd lost someone. Dad pulled me aside and said I should be grateful Gunnar was stepping up, that it was what Dad would have wanted. I nodded, but my mind was racing. I didn't open the USB that night, or even the next. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days because part of me was terrified of what I'd find. I kept replaying Grandpa Clyde's words, his weak grip, the way he looked at me like I was his last hope. Whatever was on that drive, it was something he'd trusted only me to handle, and that thought kept me up every night. I didn't know it then, but those 20 minutes in that hospital room were the last time I'd ever feel like part of the Whitaker family. Gunnar's speech at the funeral wasn't just a performance. It was the opening act of a lie that would unravel everything. And the USB in my pocket wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was the key to a truth nobody else in that church could have imagined. I sat in that Wichita hotel room for 3 straight days, just staring at the USB Grandpa Clyde had pressed into my hand with his last strength. On the 4th morning, I finally plugged it into my laptop. The first file that opened was a scanned copy of an irrevocable trust document dated 11 years earlier. I skimmed the pages until I reached the section that made my breath catch. The trust was worth $12 million and clearly stated that upon Grandpa Clyde's death, the entire amount was to be divided equally among his 3 grandchildren, Gunnar, myself, and Dash. $4 million each. No conditions, no favorites. Then I turned to the next page and felt the floor drop out from under me. Tucked into a hidden rider that required a separate password Grandpa had whispered to me in the hospital was the real bombshell. He had named me Kingsley Whitaker, sole successor trustee with full authority to manage, invest, and distribute the funds. Gunnar was never meant to touch a single cent without my approval. Grandpa had seen something in him none of us wanted to admit. The final folder on the drive contained bank statements going back 6 months before Grandpa died. Even then, Gunnar had already started moving money, small transfers, at first labeled investment advisory fees, to a company I'd never heard of. By the time of the funeral, he had quietly siphoned off more than $300,000. I printed every page, my hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. That same afternoon, I called my Aunt Thelma Whitaker, Grandpa's younger sister, and the paralegal who had worked in his office for 30 years. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her what I'd found, she went completely silent for almost a full minute. Then she said, "Bring everything to my house right now. Do not tell a soul." I drove straight there, the stack of documents riding shotgun like a loaded gun. Thelma spread the pages across her kitchen table and read in silence while I paced. When she finally looked up, her eyes were hard. "This is airtight," she said. "Your grandfather made me a co-signatory on the master copy years ago in case something happened to him." Gunnar forged signature authorizations and created 7 shell companies. Every dollar he took is federal wire fraud. She tapped the writer page. "And you, Kingsley, have been the legal trustee since the day you turned 22. Nobody else even knew that clause existed." I asked the only question that mattered. "What do we do?" She didn't hesitate. "We stay quiet. We gather every new transaction he makes, and we build a case so strong the FBI will beg to take it. One wrong move and he'll destroy the evidence and play the grieving grandson card. We wait until he thinks he's completely safe." That night, we set up a system. Thelma still had contacts at the private bank that administered the trust. Every month, she forwarded me copies of whatever Gunnar requested under the guise of routine audits. I opened a locked file on my work computer labeled taxes and started organizing everything: dates, amounts, fake, invoice descriptions, routing numbers. I learned terms I never wanted to know: embezzlement, fiduciary breach, structuring. I kept a separate notebook for the lies Gunnar told the family about where the money was going: market volatility, reinvestment strategies, long-term growth. Each excuse went into the file with the matching withdrawal that paid for his new truck, or the down payment on the lake house. The hardest part was deciding to say nothing. Not to Mom, not to Dad, not even to Dash, who was still in high school, and starting to notice he never got the same allowance the rest of us used to get from Grandpa. I flew home for holidays and watched Gunnar brag about managing the estate while Dad beamed and Mom refilled his glass. I smiled, I nodded, I swallowed every word until my throat burned. By the end of the first year, the stolen amount had climbed past 800,000. By the second, it crossed 1 million. Every new statement felt like a punch, but Thelma kept reminding me the bigger the number, the longer the prison sentence when it finally came crashing down. We weren't just collecting evidence anymore. We were watching a crime happen in slow motion and letting it get bad enough that no judge on earth could call it a mistake. I stopped sleeping. I started running 5 miles every morning just to burn off the rage. At work in Denver, I became the most reliable employee anyone had ever seen, because the alternative was thinking about what my own brother was doing to the money that was supposed to give Dash a future, and let me finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. Thelma and I spoke once a week, always on burner apps, always in code. She became the only person in the world I trusted completely. 5 years of silence, 5 years of watching Gunnar buy boats and take vacations while Mom told me I was selfish for not signing whatever waiver they slid across the table at Christmas. 5 years of carrying Grandpa Clyde's last words in my head like a promise I was terrified I'd break. But promises to dying men have a way of keeping you alive until the job is done. For almost 5 years, I became the best actress in the entire Whitaker family, smiling through every Thanksgiving turkey and every Christmas toast, while the number in my secret folder climbed higher and higher. I kept flying back to Wichita for the holidays because skipping them would have raised red flags. So I sat at Mom and Dad's dining table every November and watched Gunnar carve the bird like he was already the king of the castle. He would casually mention the new lake house he'd bought with some of the trust returns, or roll up in yet another lifted truck, and act like it was just smart investing. Mom's eyes would shine with pride and Dad would slap him on the back, telling everyone what a financial genius his son had become. I'd nod, raise my glass, and say things like, "That's amazing, really impressive." Gunnar, while inside, I was adding the latest six-figure withdrawal to the evidence pile. The waiver requests started small. First, it was a single page slipped into my Christmas card one year, "Just sign here so we can tidy up Grandpa's estate." I laughed it off and said I'd look at it later. The next year, it became a thicker packet with a notary seal already waiting at the kitchen island. Mom cornered me while I was doing dishes and whispered that it would make Dad so happy if I stopped being difficult. When I still didn't sign, the tone changed. Dad started leaving voicemails about family unity. Gunnar sent long texts explaining how I was holding everyone back by being selfish. I saved every single message. Meanwhile, Aunt Thelma and I turned evidence collection into a science. She had a retired bank vice president friend who owed her favors, so every quarter we received clean copies of the master account statements before Gunnar could alter them. I taught myself forensic accounting at night, tracing transfers through his 7 shell companies, with names like Whitaker Capital Advisors and CW Legacy Holdings. The paper trail was obscene: $150,000 for a Rolex collection, $90,000 to a casino in Oklahoma, $280,000 wired to a boat dealer in Florida. Every fake invoice had his digital signature. The real gold came 18 months ago when Dash, home from college for summer break, overheard Gunnar on the back patio bragging to an old high school buddy. Dash pretended to keep scrolling on his phone, but secretly hit record. The clip was only 47 seconds long, but it was devastating. Gunnar's voice slurred from too much bourbon laughing as he said, "The old man wanted everything to go to me. The others will get nothing. Now it's all mine." Dash sent it to me at 3 in the morning, with a week later writing only, "I think something is really wrong." That recording went straight into an encrypted drive and became the centerpiece of everything we were building. Dash started asking careful questions after that, never directly accusing, just wondering out loud why he'd never seen a single dollar from the trust that was supposedly for all 3 of us. I couldn't tell him the full truth yet. It wasn't safe, and I needed him to keep acting normal so Gunnar wouldn't suspect anything. So I fed him small pieces, told him to be patient, promised him that Grandpa had wanted him taken care of. The guilt of lying to my little brother ate at me, but Thelma kept saying the same thing: one leak, and Gunnar walks away with millions while we get nothing but threats. By last Christmas, the stolen total had reached $1,900,000. Gunnar was so confident he started talking openly at family dinner about retiring at 40. He even joked that once I finally did the right thing and signed, he'd throw the biggest party Wichita had ever seen. Mom laughed like it was already scheduled. Dad raised his glass and said, "To family, looking out for family." I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt and excused myself to the bathroom to throw up. That night, alone in the guest room, I opened the folder one last time and stared at the final tally. Every zero felt like a heartbeat. I knew we finally had enough for federal charges, enough that no amount of family loyalty or small-town lawyers could make it disappear. Thelma and I scheduled a quiet meeting with the FBI for February. All I had to do was keep playing the dutiful daughter for a few more weeks. I flew home the next morning, hugged Mom goodbye, told Gunnar his new watch looked great, and promised I'd think seriously about that waiver. They had no idea the trap was already sprung, and the countdown had already started. 2 weeks ago, a heavy cream envelope arrived at my Denver apartment, gold lettering embossed across the front: celebration dinner, honoring Gunnar Whitaker Soul, heir of the Clyde Whitaker Trust. Inside was a thick card with a date, a time, and a single line that made my pulse pound. Please join us as Gunnar officially accepts his rightful inheritance. They had rented the biggest room at the country club on the edge of Wichita, hired a string quartet, ordered custom backdrops with Gunnar's face next to Grandpa Clyde's, and invited more than 40 people, old family friends, business associates, even the mayor. A notary was already booked to witness my signature on the final waiver that would hand Gunnar every remaining dollar. I stared at that invitation for a long time, then called Aunt Thelma. She answered with one word: "It's time." The night of the dinner, I waited until the string quartet was halfway through their first set before I walked in. Heads turned as I crossed the room in a simple black dress, 3 identical black briefcases rolling behind me on quiet wheels. Gunnar was holding court near a champagne tower, laughing loud enough for the whole room to hear. Mom wore a new sapphire gown and kept touching the diamond necklace he'd given her from the trust returns. Dad stood beside them, beaming like this was the proudest moment of his life. Gunnar spotted me and raised his glass with that familiar smirk. "Look who finally decided to show up. Ready to do the right thing, little sister?" I smiled back and kept walking until I reached the long head table where the notary sat with the waiver already open and a pen waiting. 40 pairs of eyes followed me. The music kept playing, but the chatter died down to almost nothing. I set the first briefcase on the table and clicked it open. Inside were bound copies of the original irrevocable trust, every page highlighted where it stated the money was to be divided equally among the 3 grandchildren, and where I was named sole trustee. I slid 1 copy to Gunnar, 1 to Dad, 1 to Mom, and 1 to the notary. "This is the real document," I said, calm and clear. "Everything else you've been told is a lie." Gunnar's smile froze. Mom gasped and clutched Dad's arm. A few guests leaned forward, sensing something was very wrong. I opened the second briefcase. Stacks of bank statements, transfer records, and canceled checks filled the air with the smell of fresh printer ink. A giant spreadsheet sat on top, showing every withdrawal, $1,900,000 total, flowing into Gunnar's 7 shell companies. I turned it so the entire room could see the final balance. This is what actually happened to Grandpa's money while Gunnar was managing it. Dad went pale and whispered Kingsley, "What is this?" Mom started shaking her head like she could make the numbers disappear. Before anyone could speak, I opened the third briefcase. On top was a tablet already cued to the 47-second recording Dash had captured. I pressed play and turned the volume high enough for the back row to hear. Gunnar's own drunken voice filled the room. "The old man wanted everything to go to me. The others will get nothing. Now it's all mine." The string quartet stopped mid-note. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered like a gunshot. Gunnar lunged forward and tried to slam the tablet shut, but Aunt Thelma stepped out from the side door where she'd been waiting. She was dressed in the same navy suit she'd worn to Grandpa's funeral and carried her own leather binder thick with notarized originals. She placed it gently on the table and addressed the room in the steady voice she once used in courtrooms. "I was the paralegal who drafted this trust 30 years ago. Every page you're looking at is authentic. Every signature is real. And every dollar Gunnar took is documented federal wire fraud." The notary closed his folder and stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. Guests started pulling out phones. Mom burst into tears and reached for me, but I stepped back. I looked straight at Gunnar and finally spoke the words I'd practiced for 5 years. "You didn't just steal from me. You stole from Dash. You stole from Grandpa's actual wishes. And tonight the whole room gets to watch what happens when you steal almost $2 million across state lines." Gunnar's face twisted into pure panic. He scanned the crowd for an escape route that wasn't there. The string quartet packed up their instruments in record time. Dad kept repeating, "This can't be right," like a broken record, while Mom sobbed into her sapphire sleeve. I closed the briefcases one by one, the clicks echoing in the sudden silence. Aunt Thelma gave me the smallest nod. Everything we had planned for half a decade had just landed exactly where it needed to. The celebration dinner was over before the salad course even arrived. The music stopped the instant I opened the third briefcase, and Gunner's recorded voice boomed through the speakers for the second time. He lunged across the table, screaming, "It's all fake." She forged everything. His face was purple champagne sloshing from the glass still clutched in his hand. Some guests stepped back. Others froze with phones already recording. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find air. Dad just stared at the spreadsheet as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if he looked long enough. Aunt Thelma moved forward calmly and laid her hand on the nearest copy of the original trust. She spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I was present when Clyde Whitaker signed this document. I notarized the rider naming Kingsley sole trustee. I have the master copy locked in a safety deposit box with my own signature on every page." She turned to the bank statements next. "These are certified records pulled directly from the administering bank by federal subpoena 3 months ago. Every transfer has Gunner's electronic approval." Then she touched the tablet, still looping the recording. "And that is his voice. I was in the house the night it was made." Gunner tried to grab the tablet again, but I pulled it out of reach. I finally raised my voice above the chaos. "3 months ago, I walked into the FBI field office in Kansas City with Aunt Thelma and turned over every document you're looking at tonight. Wire fraud across state lines exceeding $1 million is a federal felony. They've been watching the trust account ever since. Tonight was never about a celebration. It was about making sure there were 40 witnesses when the arrest happened." The side door opened on cue. 2 special agents in dark suits stepped inside, badges already out. The taller one spoke first. "Gunner Whitaker, you have the right to remain silent." The Miranda warning cut through the room like a blade. Gunner's knees buckled. He dropped the champagne glass and it shattered across the marble floor, spraying gold liquid over Mom's new shoes. The second agent moved behind him, pulled his arms back, and snapped on the cuffs with a metallic click that echoed louder than any music ever could. Mom screamed and fell to her knees right there in front of the dessert table. Dad tried to reach for the agents, begging them to wait, saying this had to be some mistake. Guests backed away, forming a perfect circle around the scene like they were watching a live crime show. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," over and over. Phones stayed up, red lights blinking. Gunner twisted against the cuffs and spat at me. "You'll regret this, Kingsley. I swear you will." The agent started walking him toward the exit. He stumbled, dragging his feet, still shouting that everything was doctored, that I was jealous that Grandpa had wanted him to have it all. The taller agent just kept guiding him forward, reading the rest of the rights without raising his voice. Mom crawled across the floor and grabbed my ankle. "Baby, please. He's your brother. Tell them to stop." Tears streaked her mascara into black rivers down her cheeks. Dad dropped beside her, both of them on their knees, now clutching at my dress like I was the last lifeline on a sinking ship. "We didn't know," Dad kept saying. "We really thought Grandpa told him privately. Please, Kingsley, have mercy." I looked down at the parents who had spent 5 years pressuring me to give away my birthright because they believed the wrong child. I thought about every holiday I smiled, while Gunner paraded new toys bought with money that was partly mine and Dash's. I thought about Grandpa's last whisper in that hospital bed, and I felt nothing but cold, clear certainty. I stepped out of Mom's reach and met their eyes for the final time. Grandpa wanted it split 3 ways. He trusted me to make sure that happened. You just chose to believe the liar. I turned my back on them, on Gunner still shouting down the hallway on the ruined celebration that would be all over Wichita news by morning. Aunt Thelma fell into step beside me as we walked out. The agents had already loaded Gunner into an unmarked car. I didn't look back once. The night air felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in years. Behind me, I heard Mom collapse completely, her sobs echoing off the country club walls. Dad's voice cracked as he called my name one last time. I kept walking. Some doors only close once, and I had just slammed this one forever. 18 months later, I stepped into the old house in Wichita one final time. It was empty, the walls stripped bare, a bright red for sale sign staked in the front yard like a headstone. Gunner is now serving 87 months in federal prison, 7 years and 3 months, with no early release. The civil judgment against him exceeds $3 million once restitution and penalties are added. He will still owe most of it when he walks out at 41. Mom and Dad lost everything: the lake house, the cars, the retirement accounts they quietly drained to pay Gunner's first legal team, all gone. The bank foreclosed on the family home 6 weeks ago. I received the realtor's listing in my email the same morning I signed the final disbursement papers for the trust. I didn't reply. With Aunt Thelma's help, I created the Clyde Whitaker Memorial Scholarship Fund. Every dollar that remained after restitution is now locked into an endowment that pays full tuition, room, and board for Kansas students who grew up like I did, working nights and weekends just to have a chance. Dash was the first recipient. He starts medical school next fall with zero debt and a quiet thank you text that simply read, "I finally understand." I cried when I got it. I changed my phone number the day the house officially sold. I blocked every old email address, every social account that still linked me to Wichita. Denver is home now. My apartment overlooks the mountains instead of flat prairie, and the air feels lighter every single morning. Some people asked if I ever think about forgiving them. The answer is no. Forgiveness requires remorse, and the only letters I ever received from Mom and Dad were demands that I help your brother appeal, or at least send money for commissary. Gunner's last message, forwarded by the prison system, called me every name he could fit on one page. I shredded it without finishing. There are families you don't forgive. You simply survive them and walk away. That night at the country club wasn't revenge. It was justice, plain and simple, the kind Grandpa Clyde believed in when he wrote that rider, and trusted the granddaughter nobody else bothered to see. I kept my promise to a dying man. I protected Dash. I honored the only person who ever treated all three of us equally. If you stayed until the very end, thank you. Thank you for watching a story that isn't about a perfect hero, just someone who refused to stay quiet. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to choose between family and what you knew was right? Did you speak up, or are you still carrying the weight? Either way, you're not alone. Some doors have to close forever so the right ones can finally open.